Okay, we are live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest. He comes to us from Canada. His name is Kevin Annett. Last name is spelled Annett. And if you're watching this on Rockfin Rumble or Twitter X, you will see the cover, really, of a something that he wrote that I saw on CreateSpace, and it's the picture for Murder by Decree, the crime of genocide in Canada, a counter report to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, But it's something pertains to his line of research, and I looked into him. He's been in kind of central and western Canada working on these unfortunate deaths associated with Indigenous people, but in the context of Canada as a crown kind of state and part of the Commonwealth. But somebody recommended him as a guest also as somebody who kind of knows a lot about the Vatican. I've done a lot of research about that recently, Knights of Malta. And there's just been a recent change with the passing of Pope Francis, a.k.a. Jorge Bergoglio, to a new American Pope known as Pope Leo XIV. But Kevin can talk a lot more about his background. I do have like a brief bio. He's also a writer. He has a master's in divinity from Vancouver School of Theology. He was formerly ordained by the British Columbia Conference of the United Church of Canada. His work has been documented in the award-winning documentary Unrepentant, Kevin Annett and Canada's Genocide. And it's based upon his book, Hidden from History, The Canadian Holocaust. And he's the author of 24 books, some of which are on Amazon, not all of them. I couldn't find all of them for sale, but he's also the co-founder and secretary of the Five Nation International Tribunal into Crimes of Church and State. And he can talk more about everything. So Kevin Annett, welcome to the show. Thanks, William. I appreciate you having me on. For people who may not have heard your other kind of interviews, I've heard you recently and seen your name pop up in multiple places. One was Sarah Westall. Maybe you can talk about your background. I know it's a pretty detailed story, but then kind of leading up with your thoughts kind of in the larger context of the Crown and the Vatican.
Sure. Well, it goes back over 30 years now, and when I talk to people, the research that's come out, the facts and the evidence that are uncontested now about this enormous crime that really spans the globe, it wasn't the result of simply research, but a whole life experience I had. And I try to emphasize that with people because it was built through the suffering and even the death of many brave Indigenous people who came forward who aren't here anymore. So I like to acknowledge them and the price we all paid for bringing this out. It started in the summer of 1992. I was newly ordained in the United Church. That's the largest Protestant denomination in Canada. And my wife and I at the time had two small children, and I started as a minister in the Alberni Valley, which is central Vancouver Island. There were no Native people when I got to the church, which seemed to me strange because about a third of the local people were Native. And some of them, well, quite a large number of them, I had been told, were baptized United Church members. So I figured, well, this is odd. And interestingly, at that same time, literally the first week I got there, I got a phone call to come out to a Native home to do a wedding. And when I got there, it was an older couple, a Native fisherman called Danny Gus. After the service, we were sitting there having tea and talking, and I asked him kind of innocently, naively, why there were no Native people anywhere, like in the churches, the stores. The community was very segregated, right, between white and Native. And he didn't say anything at first, but then he was looking out the window where the former so-called residential school stood, where he had been incarcerated as a child. And he said, they killed my best friend in there. He's buried in the hell out back, and a lot of other kids are in there with him. And all the white people know that. They don't want us in their churches. They keep us out. So, that was like the first Native home, and literally every Native family I visited after that had the same stories. Tried to take it back into the church, and nobody, of course, wanted to hear it. The church officials warned me not to look into it, with the typical kind of subtle threat about I have a family to support and, I better watch my step. But I opened the pulpit, I opened the church. It began to grow dramatically. We had a full house within a few months. And Native people began to tell their stories. This was way before any of this was ever out in the media, before the lawsuits began in 96 or anything. And it was beginning to really rock the boat. Now, the fact that I'd grown the congregation pleased people, even the older white people who didn't like natives coming in. They were content to have me there. But what clinched my fate was I found out that the United Church, like the Catholics and the Anglicans, had got lots of land from the early missionaries. And these days they were selling it off to all sorts of, corporate interests who were tied to the church. And in the case of the United Church, the largest logging company in the world, it's the American multinational Weyerhaeuser, based out of Seattle. They were grabbing all this land that the church had provided them from their missionaries. And that went against our church policy that we're to return stolen native land to the native nation. And I just cited the church policy. Next thing I knew, I was out on my can, fired without cause, and told that I had to do a years-long retraining without pay, even though I had 2 children to support, and psychiatric evaluation. Because, of course, that's what they do when they target a whistleblower. They say the guy's crazy. And they wanted me to put my head in that noose, and I wouldn't. I refused. And so I got thrown out. It was the biggest public, actually the only public defrocking of a minister in the United Church history. It was like a big show trial. Because at that same time, native survivors of these places began to bring lawsuits, and the church panicked. They went to my wife and said, he's never going to work again in this country. We'll make sure of it. So if you want to divorce him, we'll pay for it. And they did. My wife got custody of our kids. I was blacklisted, living out of my car. But that won me more credibility in the native world. And lots of people started coming to me with even more incredible stories. These are survivors. Like half the children never came out of these places, and it was genocide en masse. They were killing children. All the records, even death records that we published on murderbydecree.com, that book right there, it shows that as early as 1896, half the children were dying in these places. And that went on half a century, right? I mean, that's a death rate double that of Auschwitz, and people refuse to call it genocide, right? So we began to bring this truth out. We forced the issue. We began to do protests at churches. Eventually, after many years, the government had to acknowledge these things, but then they did a really quick cover-up about it called the TRC that I wrote this book in response to. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission. That
it's supposed Truth and Reconciliation, right?
Well,
that was there for.
I'll tell you the absurdity of it, William. The church and government set up the investigation into themselves. And I said to the media, it's like the serial killer appointing his own judge and jury. And naturally, they didn't come up with anything. They got to swab their own records of anything incriminating. They didn't have to answer a subpoena. The information that came out couldn't be used in a court of law. Any statement a native person made before the TRC had to be censored first by them. It was a total miscarriage of justice. And yet the world, the New York Times and everything, they're describing it as this, serious attempt by Canada to look into its unfortunate past, right? And so it was a complete concealment, And at the same time, I was swabbed out of the media. Like, my name was never mentioned again after that, after they did their official spin operation. So we began to publish all this stuff all over the world. And I got invited to Europe right at the same time because people in Ireland heard about it. And together, we formed this thing called the International Tribunal of Crimes of Church and State that eventually brought a lawsuit against Pope Benedict, Queen Elizabeth, that was instrumental actually in forcing Benedict out of office in 2013, because we had shared our information with the Spanish government, and they had written to Ratzinger, Pope Benedict, 6 days before he resigned, saying he could face arrest if he came to Spain, based on what the Spanish government had seen in our docket of evidence. So it had a real impact, shockwave really around the world. And the whole notion of common law courts in that really took off because people saw what we had achieved. But of course, that whole thing was obfuscated and fogged, and now most of it's being censored off the internet, all of that whole history. So
very, very little of it came out. Same thing happened in Canada as Ireland, almost the same kind of thing.
Oh, yeah.
Bodies at schools, and it actually happens in England and probably in Spain. I don't know about Spain as much, but I remember the stories out of Ireland. They're ghastly, like hundreds of dead kids.
Yep. Yeah, it is the same crime at the hands of the same big multinational corporation called the Church of Rome. So that's why we realized we had to unite people across borders to really have some kind of impact on this, right?
Right. So it's been going on for a long time. And do you think it was a deliberate policy of genocide that they were deliberately trying to kill off the native population?
Oh, we have that in letters. We
Okay.
have that in Murder by Decree. The missionaries in that are describing that we're not allowed to allow children to have a proper education, a health. And anyway, the proof's in the pudding. Like if children are dying, half of them are dying in 1910 and also in 1950. It shows it's deliberate. Otherwise, they would have brought in measures. When my mom, her family, during the Depression, a kid in the neighborhood came down with TB. He was rushed away to a sanitarium that day. Right? You isolate people. But we have pictures of native children with open tubercular sores, bandages around their heads, sitting alongside other healthy children in class in these so-called schools. So it was a deliberate policy of mixing the sick with the healthy. And there was even a Dr. Peter Bryce who worked for the government in the early 20th century. He wrote a report about it. He said, the conditions are being deliberately created to kill off native children, black and white. But he got fired. He got blacklisted like I did. The official lie wins out, right?
Right. So it's just a continuing form of biowarfare,
Oh,
just
yeah.
to under the guise of whatever it is. The schools actually weren't really schools. It's what's really crazy. Yeah.
No, they were internment camps. There was and I say in my book there, they had a death quota every month that they had to reach. And we have that from former staff members, former principals have described that they had to kill off a certain number every month, right?
It's amazing. And it's
Yeah.
just to replace the population with European born. Is that it?
Yeah, it's kind of ironic. It's like what's happening now in British Columbia. A lot of Chinese are coming in through Prince Rupert because China owns Canada pretty much now. All the oil and gas and everything, they bought it all up. The Trudeau government allowed them even to station their troops on Canadian soil to protect their investment. And so, yeah, lots of Chinese immigrants are coming in illegally right through the north, all over. And that's why a lot of native people still go missing along the oil and gas pipelines, the liquid natural gas that China's buying up, just to get rid of them like the British once did, right? So it's just the same old
The
thing.
U.S. It's a colonizational program.
Yeah.
I mean, the U.S. is riddled with that stuff.
Mhm.
I mean, they used to put them on reservations, but I guess it's a lot more efficient just to kill them off for greed. Wow.
Well, there's still reservations, but they're really kind of the chiefs, the government-funded chiefs, have a lot of power in there. They're the ones signing the deals with China to sell off the oil and gas. So, and they traffic their own kids. Most of the drug and child trafficking goes on by the chiefs on reservations, right? Because the police won't go in there, right? So they're like little banana republics.
Right. It's like that in the States. I mean, so I would assume the reservation system in Canada is like the US where they're federalized, right? So the local jurisdiction does not oversee what's going on the reservations.
Pretty much, although there's an advantage in America. In Canada, Native people on reserve are wards of the crown. They're like children, a ward of the state, like a mentally incompetent person. They can't even renovate their homes without permission from the government. They need passes to go on and off the reserve. But in America, in 1924, all Native Americans were given the right to become full American citizens. So they have citizenship rights in America. They don't in Canada. They're not citizens. That's why so many are killed off. There's no legal consequence. I did street ministry for many years in Vancouver and Toronto, and constantly there'd be reports of police shooting Native people in the alley and never even being reprimanded. I mean, that's what goes on in Canada all over the place, right?
That's incredible.
Yeah.
What's the numbers? What do you think that the total kind of genocide of natives in or indigenous in Canada is over the last 100 years?
Oh, it's all Native people since Confederation in 1867. It's a couple of million at least. In the residential schools alone, I don't like even calling them schools, in these death camps. The average death rate was 50%. Quarter of a million children passed through it. Do the math there. You're talking at least 100,000 dead children there alone. And the, damage as a result, right? Collateral damage. Native people still die at the same death rate they did a century or more ago. So it's a deliberate ongoing genocide because they still occupy land and resources, right? I mean, it's the same old motive, right?
Yeah, no, it's the same old story. It hasn't changed. And are all those residential schools, are they all tied to the Crown, the Catholic Church? Are they independent, or how are they? What's the organizational structure of those schools?
Well, officially they closed in 1996, and they were opened officially in 1899. So 107 years. They were started from the early missionary schools, mostly Catholic, some Church of England, some Presbyterian Methodist, right? But it was mostly Church of Rome doing this stuff. And then the government stepped in and legalized it all. And they made it mandatory under law for every native child to go in there, or their parents would go to jail. So it was a government church tag team operation. And yet, these kids were not just killed, they were used experimentally. In the Indian hospitals, a lot of the drug companies behind COVID and these other things were using children for decades in drug testing experiments that killed them off. Pfizer, GSK, all these companies now pushing the drugs are guilty of medical genocide against children for many years, right? So, incredible. And it's tied into the Catholic Church. They're a big investor. The Vatican Bank is a big investor, not only in the arms industry, but big pharma in a huge way. So they were, if you remember, former Pope Francis, Jorge Bergoglio, was always pushing the drug and saying everyone should get the shot and we need one world religion, and the same old garbage.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Incredible it's I think it moves against the ideas of the Catholic Church too. He's the head of the church, but these ideas of world government, all this is unique.
They've always had that idea. You don't forget the Catholic Church was the first corporation in history set up in the 4th century. And they act like that. They had the model of the whole corporatist system where you got, the emperor on top. That's why they like China so much. And in fact, a lot of the Vatican Bank money is going east to China.
Interesting.
And that's behind a lot of the politics going on, including with the present guy, which we can talk about.
Yeah, and the Vatican Bank is a whole nother story of corruption and kind of intrigue in itself, its whole history.
Yeah.
And then there's the death. Yeah, it involved the death of one of the popes. So I can't remember the name of the pope, but he lasted 25 days before he was poisoned or whatever.
John Paul I. And as a matter of fact, the present guy took his vows in Rome the same month. And it's interesting that that's not coincidental. We can talk about that if you like.
Wow. Yeah. Please do. Some people don't know the Vatican Bank. He ended up, it's woven into the tapestry of Godfather 3. So this whole background of international corruption that ties into what your story, you're kind of in a context, it's real, but it's part of a much more broader international jurisdictional story, right?
Yeah, in Godfather 3, they had that scene of the banker hanging under Blackfriars Bridge in London. That was Roberto Calvi, right?
Calvi, yeah, that's right.
Who tried to steal from the Vatican Bank, it was John Paul I. He ordered a investigation of the Vatican Bank. He was kind of a quirk in the Vatican, right? I think he read the Bible too much or something, because he ordered the bishops to sell their jewelry and to start giving it to the poor. Did away with the papal procession where they carry the guy in on the shoulder. He was more of a kind of just a democratic-minded guy, right? So he lasted 28 days. He died of poisoning. Everybody who knew him was dead within a year. The magistrates, the magistrates and the police who were investigating his death, they all got blown up. Car bomb explosions, assassinations.
I didn't know that. I wasn't aware of that. So it was like a coup. It was like a theological coup or something like that.
And as
I didn't know that.
Well, the guy who came in, John Paul II, he was a Polish fellow, Karol Wojtyła. America had not recognized the Vatican diplomatically up until then. They said separation church and state, you can't do that. But in 1982, the U.S. government did do that because, don't forget, Wojtyła was connected to Poland. The CIA was funding the Solidarity movement there. The Lech Walesa and the Solidarity opposition movement, that was getting CIA money through the Vatican Bank. And one of the conditions Pope John Paul II said was, you've got to recognize us diplomatically, because America was holding out on that. And after that, unfortunately, a lot of these other heinous things start coming out, like this Ninth Circle sacrificial cult, which we can talk about, that he was very central in. We've had 4 witnesses come forward recently who saw him and the present guy at these ceremonies.
The Ninth Circle. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. So, the thing is that a lot of people, I was raised Catholic, but there's this whole thing of this following of the Catholic Church from Peter, right? Christ to Peter. You're familiar with all the the church history, right? So Christ says, "I'll give you the keys to the church," and so that's what the Catholic Church rests on. But it became something different through time, and certainly during the Middle Ages, the popes were appointed by very powerful families, so they were really kind of almost figureheads. They weren't as in.
Right.
I don't know if they've ever really been independent.
No, they are figureheads, and they are always, including to the present day, appointed by people with the big money in the church. And don't forget, Jesus actually, there's no actual link between Jesus himself and the Church of Rome. There was an early Christian church in Rome, but it got pretty much subordinated to the thing that Constantine brought in, which was a corporation. And in fact, when the corporation came in, they nullified a lot of the foundational Christian beliefs, like love your enemy. In the Church of Rome before Constantine, Christians were not allowed to serve in the army. And if they were in the army, they had to vow not to kill anyone because it went against Jesus' basic teaching of love your enemy, right? That got turned as soon as the Church of Rome was formed. They said, no, Christians must serve the emperor. You can be a Christian in your heart, but still serve the state. So then you got this new, was it like a synthesis, right? This new organism created called the Church of Rome. And it's really, look at its history, the body count. It's been a militaristic body all throughout history, committed genocide. My ancestors in France, my French sounding name Annett, we were French Huguenots, French Protestants who had to get out of there because we were being burned out by the Vatican.
The most vicious wars were some of those 100-year wars things were off the charts. Whole cities razed to the ground, turned to ash. Yeah. And the Huguenots are all over the U.S. now, all of Canada and U.S. because of that.
Yeah, about 1 million of us got, or 1 million
Arcadia
refugees.
To Louisiana.
Yeah. So anyway, it's that violent history. It runs right against, Jesus' whole teaching and spirit, and yet people hold the two contradictory ideas in their mind at the same time. Like George Orwell called it double speak, double think, where you could, do that.
This is just one thing. It happens all over. The Catholic Church and its relationship to indigenous isn't good, even in South America, Central America. A lot of the people hear of like these death things and happen. They don't give you the context. A lot of those death things are against, like in Guatemala, they were against the indigenous. People. So in their mind, they're like, oh, that's some kind of civil war. No, they were getting rid of the local population for international causes, including corporations, whether it's Weyerhaeuser in Canada. So when you see the big picture, it gets even worse. I
wrote this book that we've sold like 1,000 copies in the last month. It tells the nature of the Vatican, what it really is. And they had a policy going back centuries saying, if you're not a Catholic, you don't have the right to live. You're not a complete human being until you've been a baptized Catholic. And so that was ordered for people to destroy all non-Catholics. And I'll give you an example of that. This last Pope Francis had this reputation of being a, quote, liberal, progressive Pope and everything. He's an American 2017. He addresses Congress, which is a bit weird, but he said he beatified or turned into a saint this Franciscan missionary called Junipero Serra in California. Well, Serra worked to death over 100,000 indigenous people because they became baptized Catholics, but then that gave them the right to enslave them. And they worked them to death. And Bergoglio says, we're inspired by his zeal. So they still have the belief, that it's
the missions. I don't know if you know this, Kevin, but the mission system is like a big thing all throughout the U.S. today with the El Camino Real, the Golden Road. And it's mythologized, I guess, to a certain extent. And it's still part of the Catholic environment. So these missions are all the way up to San Francisco. There's a section called the mission all the way down, but like that kind of the history. I mean, some of the authentic history isn't there. So you can go to those missions and they just look like maybe almost like a trinket shop to it. There's a trinket shop element to them because I've been in them recently, but
well, that's what they are. The Catholic Church in the world is the biggest financial power, the biggest corporation. It's a big money-sucking business. And, it's even in the thing that got Martin Luther so freaked out that launched the Reformation is, the indulgences where the Vatican was in debt. So they had to raise a lot of money quick to the Dutch banking house they're in debt to. So they suddenly announced in the early 1500s, everybody who died is in hell. It's in purgatory. And you need to pray your relative out of hell, but we're not going to do it for free. You're going to pay for it, which should have raised a big question mark in people's minds. But that indulgence system still goes on. Somebody told me they're in the Vatican Museum last month. Papal blessings, 150 euros. Like,
wow,
the more you
I
pay,
didn't know that.
the more you pay, the more you get into heaven. Like, people.
So they're not much different than an online televangelist. Wow,
No.
I didn't know that. See, I didn't.
No, they're the ultimate one, right?
What a lot of people don't know is that you could argue the actual Reformation started in Italy, in Florence, in the center of it all by Savonarola, which is kind of a guy who's
Right.
lost to history, but he kind of did what Luther really was
You're right.
able to do. He was like, hey, this is corrupt. Let's get rid of the vanities. Let's burn all this stuff. And they burned him at the stake right there in the center of Florence, baby.
Yeah.
I know. Like, we're not having this.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned him, because my ancestors before France actually came from Italy. They were called Waldensians. And Peter Waldo was an early Protestant. He just said, we don't need the Church of Rome. You don't need a priest to mediate you with God. That's what Christ is. The Christ is head of the church, not a pope, not a bishop, right? So that's got long roots, right? And they did their best to stamp it out, right?
Yeah, there was famous, there were the Waldensian, what did they call it? It was like heretics or something. They were seen as heretics. There was Albigensians was another one that comes to mind. All they were traveling lay priests, independent of the Catholic Church. They were not having that either, and they got wiped out. So,
well, like why they wiped out the Templars, because they opened the first banks and they had to kill them to get their money. You know,
it was competitive. It was a competitor because they wanted to be the one holding the bank, right? I mean, it was really just a banking war. That's all it was.
Sure enough.
Paraded as something else. I mean, the history is really something else, but carried out with all of the zeal of the Roman Empire, not Christian. So,
well, it really is the Roman Empire. Even the names of the Pope are Roman Emperor names, like Pontifex Maximus, the great bridge between heaven and earth. That's what the Roman Emperor called himself. That's the official title. And he calls himself Vicari Christi, which means the one who replaces Christ. And that should tell you something right there.
Yeah, the throne of Christ or whatever. Like, wow. Like,
he's a replacement. He's a substitute for Christ.
And then there's real corruption. I can't remember. I think it was Alexander the 14th had really bacchanalia type or orgiastic things, or just almost eyes wide shut levels. Who was the Pope? Who was supposedly the Pope? So
he was a Borgia. He raped his own daughter, Lucretia Borgia. Yeah. And he's the one who signed the Inter Caetera, which authorized the invasion of the New World. So
see, it makes perfect sense. Right. So even Catholics have this in their mind, Kevin. Like, there's this holy, sacred, holy Roman Church going back to Peter up to the present that's infallible and pure, and it's just not. The evidence contradicts that. I'm sorry.
Well, and even that you read the Bible and it contradicts it. So.
Right. So, I mean, and then it leads up to today with these abuses and the indigenous, and even you don't have to be indigenous to get abused in the Catholic Church. I'm sorry.
No. Well, did I mention there's an actual policy since 1929 in the Catholic Church that says when children are raped, nobody is to talk, the victim is silenced, and you don't tell the police. That's a criminal conspiracy.
Wow. Yeah, it is.
Why is it allowed to go on?
Spotlight movie, right? Didn't Spotlight win the Academy Award for that? Because it was endemic. People didn't know. Almost every diocese it was happening. Come on.
Because it's meant to happen. They have to do it. They have to cover it up under papal law. So why isn't the Pope on trial for being part of a criminal conspiracy? The governments always protect these guys.
Super powerful political. I mean,
the
Catholic Church is super powerful. And this is, I mean, people are going to call me anti-Catholic. I get called anti-Catholic, but I've critiqued Jews and I've critiqued Protestants and I've critiqued stuff. So this is a show, give me a break. You can go look at my other thing. It happens in the Protestant Church. Sorry. There are corruptions and abuses, and you can't get away with it.
Well, and even the more basic question is that when you're part of a criminally convicted body, and the Vatican has been convicted in a number of different courts, including our common law court that forced Benedict out in 2013, they're under the international law, they're called a transnational criminal organization. It's undeniable. They traffic human beings. They launder money for the mafia. Over $10 billion since 1995, somebody worked out. for the mob, that makes them a TNCO. And as such, if you give money to that, you're aiding and abetting a criminal body. They don't have the right to operate. So, how can you
Kevin,
be
it just happened here in the States. The HIAS is Catholic. They're trafficking kids who've disappeared from Mexico and South America into the US. Where do they go? Where is going on? Nobody's investigating this.
So,
and for people who don't know too, if you want me to bag on the church more, Benedict, before he became Pope, he was the head of the department that moved all the pedophile priests all around the world. So he earned his bones, so to speak. He got elevated. He didn't get sent back down to
no, you get
south of Argentina to work at some lonely old church. He got elevated to the papacy. So sorry.
Right. It's like after 9/11, what happened to these guys get elevated right after cooperating? Yeah. But that really touches on the present guy, Leo, as well, because he has his own very sordid history in South America. He was born
sorry to interrupt, but didn't Bergoglio too? Wasn't he supposedly involved in Condor and associated with some of the stuff?
And with the Argentine junta, he was friends with the generals who were throwing people out of helicopters, and then he whitewashed it for them. That's how he won his spurs, right? But
Prevost is the guy's name, right? That's the Leo from Chicago, or Leo the
Robert Prevost. Yeah,
Prevost. Thank you.
He was born in America, but actually did all his work in Peru, and that's why in the College of Cardinals, he's actually referred to as the second Latin American Pope, not as an American. And down there, he was doing the same kind of cover-up on that, but he also had played a big role with bringing Chinese investment into South America again through the port in his diocese in northwest Peru is a funnel for them doing what they do in North America, to suck all the resources out, bring in the illegal immigrants. And he played that role in a big way. But he was also, like I mentioned earlier, seen at these Ninth Circle ceremonies by witnesses who have come forward now. We've taken their testimonies, and they all corroborate each other. People who don't know each other are all describing the same thing.
Can you talk about that in detail? What is the Ninth Circle? What are the rituals? Where do they take place? And what are the witnesses saying?
Well, it's been proven by eyewitnesses, Vatican documents. We've surfaced this ever since that first trial in 2013. It was a cult set up, we believe, by the Jesuits in the 1500s, although it might have been earlier, because the Ninth Circle refers to that poem by Dante, The Inferno, where he claims to have gone to the center of hell, the ninth level of hell, where people go and where Satan resides, and they say the worst sin is to betray the trust of, especially of the innocent, like a child. So what they do there,
Christ said the same thing, right?
Yes,
if you put something on me, it would be better for you to have a millstone put around your neck and thrown into the ocean.
That's right. And what they do is they bring in children, often newborns. It parallels a Catholic Mass, where it's believed that the body and the blood of Christ is literally present in the communion elements. And
transmogrification.
When you eat the innocent, you're given eternal life. They believe that. So you take in a child, you rape them, torture them. To be in the cult, you have to sacrifice your eldest child, rape, torture, and murder them in front of the others. And then you cannibalize the body in imitation of the Catholic Mass. And eyewitnesses describe that and even more horrible things going on. And you see, there's a red list and a black list. If you do that and they target priests like this Robert Prevost, the same month he got first ordained and took vows, he took part in the ceremony. Beneath St. Peter's Square, there's what's called the Vatican Grotto in these old chambers that they use. And he took part. This one woman from Germany who I just spoke to gave a long description of how he raped and tortured her as part of his initiation. His name then goes on a red list, acceptable candidates for Pope, those who have taken part. And blacklist is you can never be Pope. It's like in governments, you're on an acceptable or unacceptable list, or judges or whoever. And so it's controlled from day one. And they control the guy that way, because Leo would never talk about this stuff now, or they'll expose all this stuff. They film it all. They've got these
blackmail.
Guys.
It's the old story. It's just like Epstein. So it's the same system.
Same deal.
The Dutroux affair. It seems to be it's the real pattern. It's just like this is.
It is, and it works because no one wants to believe it. Especially religions are the best cover for crime. They always have been. They'll take in 90% of the people because they want to believe it. You know, they want to believe this guy is saintly. I always said to people when I was a minister, I never wore a robe. I said, never trust anybody who wears a white robe all the time. What are they hiding, right?
Well, one interesting thing about the Catholic Church is they never talk. I mean, maybe the Protestant Church is just as culpable, but they never talk about the point in Christ in Jerusalem where he's railing against the scribes and Pharisees for their sins. And you see this kind of emulated even in Protestant church. So I'm not leaving out the Protestants too, but the flowery robes and the love to be in front of the population and have the front seat, the seat in the front and all this stuff. And you see it like replayed. I'm like, you hear a direct contravention of like Christ's teachings by doing this stuff, guys.
Absolutely.
I'm telling you. So the ninth, wow, it gets really dark. We were talking, I think, in the pre-show about Malachi Martin, Windswept House. He wrote about basically the infiltration of the church, at least either by Masons or Satanists or something like that. Have you read any of his stuff? Are you familiar with his work?
I have, yeah. And I think those are all parts of the dragon, if you like, touching the different thing. But my take on this is that the Vatican didn't have to be infiltrated and corrupted. It was that way from day one. I mean, not necessarily from the right founding, because early popes didn't believe they were infallible in that. There were 3 bishops in Alexandria, in Antioch, and in Rome. And they all kind of contended. They were just bishops of their churches. But suddenly they get elevated into this, quote, godlike status. As the Roman Empire falls apart, they become the new emperor. And they believed the emperor was a god. Remember, Romans worshiped the emperor as a god. Right. It's just they put a cross on the whole thing and called it Christianity. But it's the same emperor worship system, right?
Right. No, it's really true. I mean, he is a world emperor. He's probably like the Pope is more powerful than the Roman emperors ever could dream of. Like, that's what's really scary is like they were limited to the Mediterranean basin or whatever. But like,
John Adams, the second American president, said the Roman Catholic Church, if it ever takes hold in America, will destroy the Republic. Liberty and popery are opposed. Right, but that got kind of edited out of all the history books, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Interesting about Peru too. I don't know what Provost's thing, but at one point the abuse was so bad in Peru that all of the bishops were summarily fired, or something like that. This is fairly recent, within the last 10 years. I don't know if you've heard that.
Yeah, well, by fired, what they do is they just get them out of the limelight, pension them off, move them somewhere else, like they always do. They never reprimand them. They never, because you see, in the Catholic doctrine, raping a child is not a crime; it's a sin, and a sin can be forgiven. It's not a crime under the law to rape a child. They believe that children are born evil, original sin. We can do anything. Right. Thomas Aquinas, the Church Father in the 14th century, said, 12th century, he said, "Kill the body to save the soul." Right. Like, it has that twisted view of human beings and children that you can, I delivered my own children, and that, you're holding your newborn in your arms. It's sacred. Like, how can there be evil in this little soul who's taken flesh, right? And so, I mean, I don't know.
These are not biblical doctrines, by the way, for people who don't understand. These are things that have kind of just built up by tradition or have benefited the continuation of the power of the church or things like that.
Right.
So it's very important for people to understand that these doctrines are like that. And there was another scandal, the Australian guy, I can't remember his name. I'm old, but like he was like the number 3 in church, and he had, all kinds of problems with the altar boys.
George Pell.
And it's when you see this thing, you see this skilled PR manipulation of things, how they can do it, and because they've done it over and over. And this is not even in the context of the Catholic Church, but like they had real evidence against the guy, and then he repented, and they slow rolled it, and they just it all got massaged out, and you don't know like the payoffs underneath the system. That's the other thing that Spotlight showed, was these payoffs to the victims were in the tens of millions. So if not billions. So it's kind of like in a strange way, like I've seen comedians do bits about this. There's an element of the Catholic Church of abuse and payoffs. And so the income that comes in from the parishioners paying off these pedophiles for decades. Like, it's crazy.
Well, not just child rapists, but child killers. I mean, these practices go on. They've got it's the most, there's more people killed by the Catholic Church in history than any institution. Yet then how come it has tax exempt status? They're protected. They have a license to kill children and rape children and never face any music. They have their own legal system. They're outside. Here's the thing. They're really, they're challenging American sovereignty at every level, because they say to their parishioners, do not obey American child protection laws. Defy the laws of America to follow Roman edict. That's normally considered an act of war, when you're violating the sovereignty of another nation. Yet they're allowed to do it, and presidents go over and go to Rome and visit the guy. So it's a huge criminal conspiracy that all the governments cooperate in, and everyone sitting in the pews is paying for it.
Right. No, it's really incredible when you really think about it, and all the fealty the modern presidents give to the Roman Church and bowing. I mean, there's just picture. Like they literally had Vance with Bergoglio, like, kissing the ring, like literal ring kissing, like fealty. Like, wow, this is incredible.
I know.
It's an incredible world when you really get behind. I mean, and the other thing is like this mythologizing fiction of like the holy, like even the Holy Roman Church people. It's not Roman. It's not holy. I mean,
Jesus said, "Call no one on earth father, because you have one father in heaven." Well, we'll ignore that and call all these guys father. It's
a direct prohibition. It's a direct prohibition of Christ. There's a lot. That's why the Protestant Reformation took place with the when the printing press took place, because people could actually read the Bible and go, "What the heck are you guys doing?"
And you wouldn't have the American Republic if it wasn't for the Reformation, and the idea that people could govern themselves spiritually, so we should politically as well, right?
Right, because they didn't have the original founders didn't have that fealty to the church. There were only 2 Catholic states at that time. I think it was Pennsylvania and Maryland.
Maryland, yeah.
And their sensibilities were all Enlightenment. It wasn't like fealty to the Roman Church. Mm-hmm. So you have the kind of credit to, they were all Protestants of one stripe, right? Puritans or whatever. So it's
or free thinkers, kind of like Tom Jefferson, deists, right? Who said God is in our reason and our capacity to understand. That's really empowering for people, right?
Right. What's the solution like this? I mean, I guess it's awareness to know what's really going on. Like this, you would think the Catholic Church would just be a theological, hands-off thing, but it's really not just a pure theological church. It's a kingmaker. It has political impact and financial too, through the Vatican Bank and through all this stuff, right?
Well, it's a criminal syndicate, and that's the point. It's got the veneer on the outside to keep the people coming in to get the tax exemptions and to maintain the biggest lie in history, I believe. But that's the thing. The way you change it is by voting with your feet and not funding it, not attending. You can be, and I know Catholic priests who've left and started their own congregations. I think we need a new Reformation where people pull out and just recreated them, and without any of the trappings of crime and all this corruption that's associated with it, right? So that's the real answer in the long run, I think.
I had one of those priests on. His name was Sean O'Lear from Ireland, who was a Catholic priest, and he just was too independent, and they're just like, okay, it's oil and water. It's not going to work. And he did the same thing. He started his own congregation, really, in a kind of, I don't know. I don't like those terms Catholic and Protestant because it's kind of binary, but something different like than the Catholic he started. And
right. Good. Well, that's the way it should go. Just do your own thing.
Yeah. And then the thing is that people can really, this is a time in history that isn't curtailed by somebody owning all that information. Like we're at a novel time in history where you and I could have this conversation and know the authentic history of these churches and these places that a lot of the peasants and illiterate people didn't have access to. So we're really in a kind of privileged place, maybe not recognizing it, but like, hey, this is really what happened. Like, this is what you're supporting.
Right.
Like, I think abuse in the Catholic Church is endemic, theological abuse.
Yeah, and we have to, Christians, what are we going to do with that freedom? With that liberty? We've got to use it as a way to help those people who can't speak, and the victims, and all the people I work with whose friends were killed and trafficked, and they're still being trafficked by this very church. right?
They're
So
still being the
oh
HIAS was getting paid.
yeah,
There's hundreds of thousands of kids. I
yep,
mean, it gives you questions about the theology. I mean, how much is the Catholic Church involved in the
yeah,
non-prosecution of this trafficking, right? Like we don't see that.
no.
We don't see what's going on behind the you know.
90% of it's never brought to court.
Yeah,
You
it's
know,
never going to be
they're
brought to court.
protected, but that's what we're trying to do now. We have actually stopped some of these rituals through our network. We do confront the child rapists to the face and stop them. They hate it. They run like moles from the light when you confront them on this. So action does have an effect, and I think people are voting with their feet. I was in Ireland a few years ago. Biggest cathedral on a Sunday morning, seats 500. I counted 38 people. Right, you know, and that's in a loyal Catholic nation like Ireland, you know.
Right. There's
So
a lot of they're very angry at the Catholic Church there
they
because
should
they've
be.
had a lot of abuse, like
Yeah, oh yeah.
endemic. Like some of those priests, their abuse count was like in the high hundreds and stuff. Like
What does that
they
tell you?
were,
They got away with it.
yeah, for decades. Like it's sick. It is so freaking sick. Anyway, thanks for coming on. Thanks for sharing your
Oh, I
story.
appreciate it. Yeah.
Where can people reach out to you? Where can they find out more information? It looks like you have a ton here at
Yep.
your website, murderbydecree.com.
Yes, and I'm also on speaking tour in August, and then going over to Europe to help with this court investigation of the present Pope Leo, Robert Prevost. And so contact me, angelfire101 at protonmail.com.
Okay, that's your email. Angelfire101 at protonmail.com.
That's
Be
it.
contacted. You have this website. You've got books. I'll put a
And
link
especially
to
that one you put up. That's a really important one for people to read. Yeah.
Dethroning the Rogue Power. It's a strange. I mean, there's so many connections to the Catholic Church to Israel now. There's so much action going on, and I saw Marco Rubio in front of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and all this genocide that's happening there. Like it's really there's a lot of very heavy duty things happening in the world today. So people need to be aware of a lot of this stuff and the authentic history.
Right.
The real history of this stuff. So
good.
Kevin, Annett, thanks so much for your time. I'll
Thank
put
you,
all
William.
links in there and stay safe and good luck with your book tour.
I'll keep you updated.
All right,
Thank you.
cool. All right, stay there. Stay there.